To a wonderful life message for today is the nature of God is giving-ness. The nature of God is giving-ness. So we look to those words of the mastermind Jesus to give us our evidence that these words are the truth for all of us, that the nature of God is giving-ness. Jesus tells us in the Lord's Prayer, which is the key to life, he tells us, Our Father, which art in heaven, and heaven being that state of mind that recognizes God's presence, that God is present in our life. He says, you give us this day our daily bread, and that daily bread symbolizes every good thing that we desire that will make our life a greater life experience, a more wonderful, a more healthy, a more joyous, a more prosperous experience, as well as those around us. So we know that this givingness of God is something that we can rely on to know that it's the truth for us, and that as we express that life of God, that image likeness of God, we know that this likeness is part of that nature of God's givingness. That's why Jesus said, I have come to tell you that you can have life and you can have it more abundantly. And why can we have it more abundantly? Because Jesus tells us to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, and equally important, love our neighbor as ourselves. In other words, eliminate any negative thoughts or judgments from our mind. To love God is to trust in God, depend on God, look to God for our all in all, look to God for our everything, and to realize that God, this word that we use to define the undefinable, because God is infinite intelligence, infinite power, infinite spirit, way beyond anything that our human mind can grasp, that this Spirit of God is both love and law, both love and law. The love is the givingness, the law is the way in which all things are done. And as Jesus tells us, the law is, it is done unto you as you believe, as you sow into your mind the positive thought, the faithful thought that God does give to you each day your daily bread, and that God is giving each and every one of us the opportunity to live the abundant life, then we realize in our mind, our heart, and our soul that this truth will be made evident in our life, that will be revealed to us soon enough. Let's look at some words this morning from the mystical Ernest Holmes. He says, we are individual points in the consciousness of God, or the original creative spirit of the universe. We are points where it thinks through us, or as we say, God as mankind in mankind is mankind. But the God that is in us is the same God that is universal. There is no wall of separation, no barrier, no place where one begins and the other leaves off. All is one and one is all. Now, for many people, that seems hard to wrap our mind around that and understand it. But think about right where you are. There is no wall of separation between you and the law of gravity, that there is no place where gravity ends and gravity begins, that we are in the law of gravity. We are in the law of God, which is the law of good. We are in the law of the spirit of intelligence and power, right where we are, and there is no place where it begins and leaves off, because it's always present. Omnipresent, omniscient, all intelligence, omnipotent, all power. So Dr. Holmes tells us all is one and one is all. The creativity of thought is not dependent on the thinker. Only the choice of thinking is dependent on the thinker. In other words, we can choose faith or we can choose to not have faith, dismiss faith. The creative activity of thought belongs to the universe. That's what Dr. Holmes tells us. In other words, that creativity, that right idea, that idea that creates something greater and better will come to the universe, come from the universe to mankind, but it's up to us to act on those ideas that come to us. One of the things we must come to understand, Dr. Holmes says, in dealing with the laws of spirit, is that we are always operating in a realm of divine law and order, in a realm of divine law and order. Just as gravity is always operating in a realm of divine law and order, law and order in mathematics, law and order in the way the universe is projected into our life experience. The people used to think that the sun went around the earth rather than the earth rotates around the sun. And we know that everything comes to us in the right and perfect time, in the right and perfect way, and we get the right ideas if we let ourselves be open to a better idea for us. If we're not realizing something wonderful in our life, we need to go back into our thoughts and our beliefs and the concepts we have about life and say, what is it that I'm believing that brings me this circumstance or situation or condition that I'm facing? What is it that I'm believing that brings me the negative things? What is it that I'm believing that brings me the positive things, the increase of good? And start focusing on that power within our mind. Now, a few nights ago, I listened to a YouTube sermon presented by T.D. Jakes on tithing. And T.D. Jakes is someone that I have a great respect for. It was fascinating in that he stated something that few people of his theology say. He said that most people who tithe don't understand why they tithe. And he stated that people by and large tithe because their minister, pastor, preacher tells them to, but they really don't understand the full idea of it, the concept of it. And I applaud his efforts to explain his reasons for why people should tithe. Yet at the same time, his reasons didn't seem so reasonable to me. They didn't convince me. When he went all the way back to the Old Testament of the Bible for his reasoning, quoting from the book of Leviticus, he kind of lost me. The Bible is largely a mix of cultural traditions, allegories, and for those willing to find them, spiritual principles. Pastor Jake's tithing lesson met the requirement for cultural tradition, but it missed the mark regarding allegories and spiritual principles. Tithing is not a spiritual principle. It was an early Hebrew tradition and has been passed on from generation to generation. I can read in Judaism.org, which gives us the Jewish ideas, a Jewish concept of tithing. It reads, those who are not in agriculture give 10% of their net income, weekly, monthly, or annually, and give that to worthy causes, particularly helping the poor and supporting Jewish education. Now, this differs greatly from the Christian theology espoused by T.D. Jakes and most evangelicals, traditional Christians, and Catholics. And although I find the Jewish concept of tithing more appealing than giving 10% exclusively to churches and religious organizations, it still does not close the circle that is a requirement of spiritual principle. Now, Dr. O.C. Smith, who was my teacher and my mentor in his last Sunday message, he implored people to tithe a percentage. He didn't say they had to tithe 10%, but they should tithe a percentage, especially if they were working on increasing prosperity in their lives. Because if you tithe a percentage and you make $100 this week and you tithe 5%, you're going to give $5, and then you make $150 next week, you're going to tithe $7.50. So your subconscious mind is going to be impressed with the increase, and that impression of the increase on your subconscious or your soul is going to create a greater expression of increase, and you're going to see that impression on the subconscious become an expression of a greater increase of prosperity in your life. And we can say the same thing about health and happiness and joy and all those things. But I don't believe that everything that tithes should be given to the churches or the synagogues or the whatever it is that we give to the spiritual centers should be given exclusively to them. I think we should go back and we should think, where is the great need or the great thing that I want to be connected with? Because whenever we tithe, we're connecting ourselves with someone. So what worthy cause is there? Is there a way I can help people who need a hand up? Not a handout, but a hand up. And whatever it is that I support, whether it's a spiritual or a religious organization, then I want to give that some of my financial support as well. Because as we learn to give, we're imitating that nature of God's givingness in a greater way. Now, as the Mastermind Jesus taught principle, we are to freely give and freely receive. Now, this is where we come into that circle of the requirement of spiritual principle. Freely give and freely receive, this corresponding action to our giving is principle. To give without receiving is to believe that other than the giver, and at some point our spirit of giving will diminish and perhaps become obligatory. We give out of obligation, and so they're no longer in the spirit of God's givingness. And so that tithe, that donation, that faith offering, whatever it may be, doesn't bring us any kind of increase. And this is the state of mind that stops us from receiving all that is ours to do, to be, and to have. It is the feeling or the spirit in which we give that is of utmost importance, not the amount or the percentage. And this is the truth that we can find throughout our study of the Holy Bible and the writings of all the mystics who have revealed the truth. It is our aligning ourselves with the nature of the infinite, the nature of God, that causes us to both give and to receive. And as we live spiritual truth, we will find ourselves in tune with the infinite good, and we shall give freely to that which is worthy and that which supports our faith and the things that we value. We can know that this is a part of the truth that will set us free as we open our mind to the Spirit to elevate our awareness to realize this in our experience, Our giving of financial support is minor in compared to the giving of love and understanding, peace and prayer. These things are in the nature of the Spirit, and our purpose is to let the Spirit express its nature through us, as us, and for us. Our giving of the tithe or offerings is diminished when we fail to give of the things of the Spirit. This is why we read in the ancient wisdom, "For God loves a cheerful giver." It is this joy in giving that draws to us the surplus that enables us to give and to give more. We should give freely, never from a sense of lack or financial struggle or obligation. If we can't give money, then we should give happiness. We should give joy. We should give cooperation. We should open doors for people. We should smile at people. We should acknowledge people. We should give of our spirit, our talents and our abilities if possible. If we can't give of money at this point in time, we can always give of money. Don't get me wrong. But sometimes we're not in that place in consciousness where that seems like an option for us. And so we must give of whatever it is that we have, because we go back to that principle, that absolute principle that Jesus gave us, that he who has little will have even less, and he who has much will have even greater still. So we must say to ourselves, I always have something to give. I always have something of value to give. And as I feel that value of the gifts of the Spirit within me, then I know those things that I give, that cooperation, that happiness, that confidence, that strength, that willingness to participate and to support that which is worthy, that thing, that spirit within me will draw to me even greater things. So these thoughts in our mind reveal that we have mental and spiritual work to do, and writing the check will not displace them with the joy of knowing that God is giving through us. We must first commit to the consciousness that we have something to give always, and we can attain this consciousness through persistence. We can claim it through persistence. So we must be willing to think about what it is that's going on in our life. You know, a lot of people don't like to think. They don't like to think. You know, they don't want to think about who they vote for. They don't want to think about what they hear in their church or their synagogue or their mosque or their spiritual center. They don't want to think. You know, I had people that say, oh, I would come to your church, but you make people think. Well, why shouldn't we think? We should use the mind that God has given us, use the intelligence that God has given us, use the wisdom that God has given us, and find within us a greater idea to live this thing called life, a greater idea to express this thing called life, and a greater way in which to let the nature of God move through us, as us, and for us, to reveal the good that God has for us and for all those in the world around us, and those especially that we come into contact with. But we must take it into our mind that we must find the truth. Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. He didn't say the truth will set you free if you don't know it. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And we read in the ancient wisdom, with all thy getting, get understanding. With all thy getting, get understanding. There are people in churches and synagogues all over the world that are giving that 10% every week, writing that check or making that donation in whatever way they can, that aren't seeing any value to that giving because they're not in the spirit of giving. It's become automatic. It's become mechanical. But the Spirit won't let us become mechanical. That's why we are here We're the spirit in human form. That's why we're here, to realize within ourselves that greater idea, that greater purpose that's calling us to realize that the nature of God should be our nature. That image, likeness of God is givingness and livingness and forgivingness, that we must find ourselves realizing and knowing and believing and accepting that all these things are part of this life experience for us. To live the abundant life, the joyful life, Jesus said, I have come to tell you that you may have life and you may have it more abundantly, that you need to know the truth, you need to gain the understanding, and if you want that truth to set you free, you must find in your heart, your mind, and your soul the truth for you. And not let somebody else tell you what your truth should be, but find your own truth. Remember, we are created in the image, likeness of God, but we are infinitely individualized images and likenesses of God. God is infinitely individualized, each and every one of us. We can look at our fingerprints, and we can realize, even with billions of people on this planet, no two people have the same fingerprints, because God has created each and every one of us to be our own unique expression of itself, of its life, of its joy, of its spirit, of its power, of its intelligence. And so we want to recognize that in our mind and begin to believe it and affirm it and know it. Sit down and be still and let God tell you that's the truth for you. And so we can take on this new spirit of life into our mind, our heart, and our soul, that knows that life is always for us, that all things work to our good because we keep our mind stayed on God, on the good, keep our mind stayed on the truth, and realize that just as Jesus said, the Father is spirit, and we must worship him, trust in him, depend on him, look to him, love him in spirit and in truth, and that means to love life. There's only one life, that life is God. That life is the life that each and every one of us are living to the degree, to the measure that we have that realization that we are living as the image, likeness of God, and we take that into our mind as the truth for us, and we let that be our foundation, that thing that we look to, that perception that we take into our mind, that everything is coming to us for our good, and we let all the good come forth. Let's go back to those words from the mystical earnest Holmes. We are individual points in the consciousness of God, or the original creative spirit of the universe. We are points where it thinks through us, or as we say, God as man, in man is man. But the God that is in us is the same God that is universal. There is no wall of separation, no barrier, no place where one begins and the other leaves off. All is one and one is all. The creativity of thought is not dependent on the thinker. Only the choice of thinking is dependent on the thinker. The creative activity of thought belongs to the universe. And one of the things we must come to understand in dealing with the laws of spirit is that we are always operating in a realm of divine law and order. In a realm of divine law and order. So as we take it into our mind that the nature of God is givingness, then we must take it into our mind that same truth, that the nature of myself, the nature of me, is givingness. And as Jesus tells us, to freely give and to freely receive, to look to God for everything. Don't look to person, place, or thing, because then you can come to resent it. People resent their employers for not paying them enough money or giving them enough vacation time or not treating them well. Look to God for everything. Don't look to anybody else. People resent the wealthy. The wealthy resent the people who are happy. So there's all these things that go on in the noise and nonsense of the world that we must separate ourselves from. And that's why Jesus said, go into thy closet. Sit and be still, just as it tells us in the Old Testament. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that there's something greater than you see in the world. Be still and know that there's something greater than you can see, hear, feel, taste, or touch that's always available to you, that's always seeking you to recognize it, to realize it, to find it in your heart, your mind, and your soul. And we can know all these things. We can obtain this consciousness through persistence. As the mystical Emma Curtis Hopkins wrote, this is the mystical Emma Curtis Hopkins. She wrote, "You may know all things by a little persistence. Therefore, cultivate persistence." And where do we cultivate persistence? We cultivate it in our mind. Cultivate persistence, get a good idea of what you can do, and carry it out. In other words, act on that new idea. And keep this word as the truth for you. Say, I am satisfied with myself. I am satisfied with myself. And so we truly appreciate these words from Emma Curtis Hopkins, because we know that it's true that we may know all things by a little persistence. We can know peace and prosperity, success and health, happiness and joy, as we use a little persistence in giving of all these things with joy. And so it is, amen. And so it is, amen. Once again, I want to thank you for being with me this morning. It's been my great pleasure to have you, and I hope you join me for my next